Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at the Aviation, which has passed the developers over the last month or so. There's a bunch of really cool ones actually, so we're going to have a look at all of them and have a pretty good time. The one that we're actually going to be missing this time though is the SM93, so if you want to check that out, make sure to go to the link in the description, but everything else will be covered, going all the way from Germany, even into Hungary here, with a few different things. Let's get into it. The first vehicle is the Junkers Ju-287 V3. The 287, you could call it the mother of all forward-swept design aircraft. It was a multi-engine tactical jet bomber which was built by the Germans in 1944. It featured a forward-swept wing design, and on the V1 was one of the very few jet-propelled aircraft with a fixed landing gear. The 287 was meant to provide the Luftwaffe with a bomber that could avoid interception by outrunning enemy fighters. The one to come up with this design, and also was the project lead, was Dr. Hans Vock, and as a way to provide an aircraft with extra lift at low airspeeds. This design allowed the installation of one massive bomb bay in the best location and in the aircraft's center of gravity, which of course is in the middle. The wings would not be an issue because the wing spars were passing behind the bomb bay, which meant the wings could be in the best location for aerodynamic performance. The flight test began on the 8th of August 1944, with the aircraft displaying extremely good handling characteristics and also revealing as well some problems with the forward-swept wing design under some flight conditions. The most notable of these problems was the wing warping or excessive in-flight flexing of the main spar and wing assembly. Some tests later, they came to the conclusion that the warping problem would be eliminated by the concentrating greater engine mass under the wings. At one occasion during a test, they dived at full jet power and attained a speed in a medium dive angle of 660 kilometers an hour. But sadly, after the 17 flights in September 1944, the Ju-287 project was shelved to save resources for the Volksjäger program. At the end of the war, though, the program was suddenly relaunched, and production of the V3 started, but sadly they couldn't finish the whole plane before the war ended. And only 80 to 90% of the plane was made, but it had just had a few things missing, such as the engines had some parts missing, and also the weapons themselves. And so the story came to an end in Germany, but then the program continued in Russia under the USSR leadership, which gave birth to the EF-131 and then also the EF-140. Then we have an incredibly enhanced MiG-21, the MiG-21-93. This is an upgrade program of the MiG-21 BIS, which was made in cooperation with RSK MiG, Sokol Aircraft Plant, and also Fazatron NIIR. The main features of the upgrade were a new cockpit with a new canopy, a modern hood, an MFD display, and also HOTAS controls. Also, a new Kopio radar, which was developed by from the Zuk, which is the Yak-141 radar, and is pretty much comparable with its performance. It features both high and low PRF modes, and also TWS, with the capability of tracking 8 targets at the same time, and also firing at 2. It also got access to some new weapons, mainly the R-27R1 on 2 inner pylons, also the R-73 and the R-77. The prototype of the upgraded aircraft flew in 1995, and while no country bought the MiG-21-93, the MiG-21 UPG, the Bison upgrade program for the Indian MiG-21s, was heavily based off of it, with all the main features of the MiG-21-93. The new radar and the new cockpit, and also the new missiles. They're all on the Bison. So kind of a spiritual successor. For Japan, we have a pretty crazy machine. It's the Ki-93-1A. The Ki-93 was the last heavy fighter and also ground attack aircraft built in Japan during the war, and was the only design of the Rikugun Kogujitsu Kenyugo Army Aeronautical Research Institute to be flown. Powered by two 2,400 horsepower Mitsubishi HA214 18-cylinder air-cooled radials, driving 6-blade propellers, the Ki-93 was designed specially to carry large caliber cannons in its under-fuselage gondola. From its inception, the aircraft was designed to perform as a high-altitude heavy bomber-destroyer, as well as a low-altitude anti-shipping aircraft. In its bomber-destroyer form, the Ki-93-1A, the aircraft carried an offensive armament comprising of one 57mm HO-401 cannon and two 20mm HO-5 cannons, while for the anti-shipping missions, the Ki-93-1B, its offensive armament comprised of one 75mm Type 88 cannon and also two 250 kilo bombs. In both instances, defensive armaments consisted of a single handheld 12.7mm Type 1 machine gun. The cockpit and engine nacelles were heavily armored, and all fuel tanks were self-sealing and had an automatic fire extinguishing system. Production of the Ki-93 was entrusted to the Daiichi Rikugun Kokusho, or the 1st Army Air Arsenal, at Tachikawa, and the first prototype, fitted with the armament intended for the Ki-93-1A, was completed and flown in April 1945. The chaotic conditions prevailing in Japan at this late stage of the war delayed the flight trial program, and the tests were not completed prior to the Japanese surrender. A second prototype, in Ki-93-1B ground attack configuration, was completed, but not flown before the final collapse. There's also a new F-5, the Northrop F-5F 5391/30130. In 1963, the ROC placed an order for 60 F-5As. These aircraft were chosen as successors to the famous F-86F. On the 12th of September 1965, the first two aircraft were delivered to the ROCAF. The order was eventually completed, but not before 1968. In 1972, due to the Vietnam War, USA asked for 48 F-5As and spare parts. Although initially reluctant, the ROC decided to cave into the American request. As counterfeit, it was decided to examine the possibility of an F-5E co-production scheme. A MOU was signed on the 9th of the 2nd, 1973. This document stated that the US was to provide a batch of 28 F-5Es as replacement for the F-5As that were given by the end of May 1975. Under the codenamed Hu-An, which means Peace Tiger, it was decided to establish co-production facilities in Taiwan for 100 F-5E or F machines. The first unit to receive the second-generation F-5 was the 443rd Tactical Fighter Wing in December 1974. The ROC issued a request to be able to produce a second batch of 42 F-5Es and 18 F-5Fs, and this was granted. During the 80s, the combat capacity of the F-5E and F was improved with the addition of the Lytton ALR-46V radar warning receivers, and also the Northrop AVQ-27 designators and the Tracor ALE-401 V7 chaff flare dispensers, and some late-built aircraft were modified with the addition of the Tiger Shark nose. These aircraft were also equipped with new equipment in the form of AGM-65A Mavericks, the laser-guided bomb series Paveway 2s, and when it came down to air-to-air combat, they were given the newer AIM-9P4 missiles. The F-5Fs have been fitted with the Northrop AVQ-27 manual laser target designator to provide an autonomous designation capability for the GBU-12 and also the GBU-10. These new aircraft were designated the F-5E Module C and the F-5F Module F. In the mid-80s, a program was launched to diminish the dependence on US products. The military-run Chung-Shan Institute of Science and Technology started the development of a new short-range infrared-guided missile that could be on par with the latest models of the AIM-9 Sidewinder. The result of this program was a success, and the new missile was named the Tianqian-1, or the Sky Sword, or for short the TC-1. Although it never entered service on the F-5, the first test firing of the TC-1 was actually made by an F-5F in April 1986. This was the Northrop F-5F 5391/30130. The French get the Jaguar A late, which is basically an improved version of the Jaguar A. The main thing that it adds is some upgrades that the Jaguar A got in service when it was in France. The first one would be the R550 Magic II missiles, which of course are the all-aspect seeker version of the Magic I, with also an improved IRCCM, incredibly powerful missiles which you would get access to, and also another upgrade that was put on the Jaguar A's would be the CLDP pod. This pod was tested on Jaguar A's in 1988 and was used to fire and guide the AS-30L missile, indicating the pod was fully integrated with the vehicle itself. The targeting pod can actually be found already on the Mirage 2000D R1, so therefore you could add it in. Everything else would basically be the same, so a few improved armaments, and that's about it. For Israel, we have the Gloster Meteor FR Mark 9. This was developed from the Meteor F Mark 8 fighter jet, seeing the F Mark 8 model equipped with a slightly different nose housing tactical photography equipment while retaining the F Mark 8's main armament of 4 20mm cannons. This Meteor variant also saw some changes to its fuel system, allowing it to carry additional fuel tanks if needed to increase flight range. The variant first took to the skies on the 23rd of March 1950, with serial production beginning in July of the same year, and then entered service with the RAF in 1951. The Israeli Air Force's acquisition of the Meteor FR Mark 9 was conducted with a deal signed in March of 1954, with the British government allowing the sale of 9 Meteor aircraft, of which 7 were the FR Mark 9 variant, and the other 2 were the T Mark 7 unarmed trainer variant. All of the aircraft were ex-RAF aircraft that were sold back to the Gloster company, who refurbished them and began supplying the aircraft to the RAF from December of 54 until May of 55. These aircraft were numbered 31 to 37 in the IAF. The aircraft presented a very necessary leap forward for the IAF in terms of tactical photography, since up until that point, the primary aircraft used in this role was the aging de Havilland Mosquito PR Mark 16 aircraft. Despite this, more often than not, the FR Mark 9 Meteors were used as combat aircraft to supplement the small fleet of F Mark 8 aircraft. In fact, only aircraft 35 and 36 fully retained the capability for photo reconnaissance, while the other aircraft either had the camera pod painted over or had their nose completely replaced with that of a Meteor F Mark 8. The Mark 9 served with the 117th 1st Jet Squadron, with the first sortie carried out by a Meteor of this variant being a tactical photography mission over enemy territory on the 22nd of May 1955. Despite not being a dedicated fighter aircraft, it was a Meteor FR Mark 9 that drew the first blood for the Israeli Air Force in the jet age. On 7 AM on the 1st of September 55, Israeli ground control discovered 4 Egyptian de Havilland Vampires that had flown over the Gaza Strip and diverted their aircraft eastward, penetrating Israeli airspace. Despite not being the pair designated for emergency response that day, Captain Aharon Yoeli and Captain Yehoash Zidon were the first to respond, with Aharon taking off from Hatzor Air Base in the FR Mark 9 number 36, and Chateau taking off in the Meteor F Mark 8. The pair flew to the southwest, where ground control told them the vampires were headed. Chateau was the first to identify the Egyptian vampires at an altitude of 2,000 meters, 2 of which were quick to escape south towards their airbase in El Arish upon the arrival of the Israeli Meteors, leaving the sky with 2 Egyptian vampires against 2 Israeli Meteors. The Israeli Meteors, flying in from the direction of the sun and using their altitude advantage, dove towards the Egyptian vampires, with Aharon on the Mark 9 in the lead. Aharon set its gun sight to night mode and at a distance of 150 meters opened fire on the first vampire. Aharon hit the vampire in the roof of its left wing, but the pilot didn't bail, and so Aharon kept on firing, causing the aircraft to set on fire and lose control, plummeting to the ground. Aharon proceeded, breaking left, with Chateau behind him, chasing the second vampire, which began fleeing south. As they approached the border with the Gaza Strip, they caught up to the vampire over a kibbutz called Erez. The Vampire conducted a series of rolling maneuvers at low altitude to avoid the meteors, but to no avail, and at a distance of 200 meters, Aharon in the FR Mark 9 squeezed the trigger, hitting the Vampire directly in the cockpit, causing the aircraft to explode and then crash just west of the kibbutz. We also have the Hungarian Me-210CA1. The Me-210 was intended to supplement and even replace the Bf-110, with an aircraft of much higher performance. It was far more aerodynamic than the Bf-110, allowing it to reach much higher speeds, and included features such as a bomb bay in the nose for reduced drag and advanced remote-controlled defensive turrets. However, it was far from living up to the expectations of when the first prototype took to the skies in 1939, and suffered from serious aerodynamic issues. Oscillations were common, and stability was poor, but the worst part was the serious stall issues. Several attempts to remedy these problems, such as shifting from twin to single rudder, were attempted but had little effect. Out of the 1,000 ordered, only 90 were complete, with 320 incomplete airframes put into storage. The failure of the Me-210 forced Germany to restart production of the Bf-110, which was obsolete at this point of the war, and the Me-210 would only return with serious revision later as the Me-410. One of the attempts to salvage the Me-210 was the Me-210C, which included newer, more powerful DB605 engines, as well as lengthening the fuselage by 92 centimeters. Hungarian authorities were satisfied with the revision as a safer alternative to their risky and expensive turboprop-powered RMI-XH, and so bought the license to produce the aircraft, with the deal that 2 out of every 3 produced would go to the Luftwaffe. The specific changes made were having DB605B engines, new wings with a swept back of 4 degrees, and a simplification of the complex armor scheme, removing many of the bottom plates. These changes, made to the Me-210CA1, it made it a much better aircraft, which served successfully until the end of the war. The Hungarians required an aircraft capable of defeating Allied bombers, and from the outside the range of their guns, and undertook a few projects to equip the Me-210 with such a capability. The first of these was to equip the plane with launchers of 15cm Nobelwerfer rockets under the wings. These triple pods were draggy, and so were able to be jettisoned after launch. This was not seen as enough by the engineers, so after the rockets had been successfully tested, it was decided to include an option for a 40mm 39M Bofors autocannon in the front bomb bay. This weapon was loaded by the radio operator and gunner, and projected to have a maximum range of 1,200 meters. However, the factory was bombed after only 3 planes had been equipped, leading to the end of the program. It could also carry a bunch of other armaments, such as 2 nose-mounted MG15120s, 2 nose-mounted 7.92mm MG17s, and then also you had 2 30mm in defensive barbettes. You could also have up to 1,000 kilos of bombs in various configurations. That's all that was passed to the developers. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Tullio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pieman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Alan Hacker, Ozzy Panzer, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Cam Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.